How will Israel respond to this latest provocation from Iran? Will it be against a strategic Iranian airbase? Will it be against Iran's nuclear facilities? Or will it be against something else? Something small which typically doesn't get headlines but is in fact one of Iran's most important sites. And just how far will Iran go to respond to such a retaliation? Could the entire world economy be wrecked? On October 1, 2024, Iran launched its second direct attack on Israel in 6 months. About 180 ballistic missiles took flight in an operation called True Promise 2. The attack was much more serious than its predecessor in April. That instance was a mostly symbolic attack using a combination of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and slower-moving drones. These drones and cruise missiles were easy for Israeli air defense systems to intercept, and none got through. Well, a few ballistic missiles did, but Israeli defenses were not overstretched. This time, hundreds of ballistic missiles were launched in a short span, which gave Israel's defenses a much larger test. Iran claims that the ballistic missiles included its Fatih 2 model, which has a speed of Mach 13. At least 20 missiles impacted Nevatim airbase in southern Israel, although they caused no injuries and no major equipment appeared to be damaged. The Tel Nof airbase, which is thought to host some of Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons, was also hit, but again without major damage. The headquarters of Mossad near Tel Aviv was a target too, although the missile missed. A school in Gadara and a restaurant in Tel Aviv suffered collateral damage from nearby impacts. In all, a few dozen missiles impacted in total. These impacts resulted in the death of 1 Palestinian civilian and 1 Israeli, plus injuries to 2 more Israelis and 2 Jordanians. That more people did not suffer in this attack is proof of the robustness of Israeli and Allied air defenses. The United States and Jordan helped Israel to shoot some of the missiles down. Nevertheless, as good as this layered defense network is, Israel can't rely on it forever. Iran has an estimated 3,000 ballistic missiles in its arsenal, in addition to the cruise missiles and drones it has stockpiled. Israel has not yet retaliated against Iran as of October 15, 2024. In the weeks that followed, it focused its efforts on wiping out the Iranian proxies of Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed that Iran would pay for its big mistake. But how? Israel is keeping its cards close to its chest, but its retaliation against Iran in April 2022 might prove to be a dress rehearsal for what it will do now. The counterattack was mostly symbolic, just as Iran's attack was. The Israeli retaliatory response back then partially targeted Isfahan in central Iran. This area includes Shakari Air Base, which has been the host for the fleet of F-14 Tomcats Iran received from the United States before the Shah was toppled from power. Isfahan also hosts some of Iran's nuclear infrastructure, including the Natanz enrichment site, which Israeli saboteurs have allegedly targeted before, but no disturbance at that or any other nuclear site was reported at the time. If Israel chooses to engage in a tit-for-tat type of retaliation, Shakari Air Base is a likely target. Nevatim Air Base came under attack for a specific reason. It hosts Israel's F-35 fleet. 3 squadrons of the specialist Israeli variant called the F-35I Adir, Mighty One, are stationed there, and more fighters are on the way. Iran claimed that its recent missile strikes at Nevatim had destroyed 20 F-35 fighters, but there was no evidence for this boast. Israel going after the F-14 in response would seem like a logical and proportionate escalation to what happened. Alternatively, there has been speculation about Israel going after Iran's nuclear facilities. The Israelis have practice in this sort of mission. They destroyed the Osirak nuclear reactor in Saddam Hussein's Iraq during Operation Opera in 1981. Like now, Israel recognized the existential threat of allowing a regime in the region that wanted its destruction to acquire a nuclear arsenal. Iran's targeting of the Tel Nof airbase may prompt this sort of retaliation. Israel's allies, including the United States, have urged caution in this area, though. While the nuclear facilities get the most attention, there is another target that would prove even more devastating to Iran if it were attacked. If Israel wants to enact maximum retaliation against Iran, it might prove the target of choice. This is Khark Island in the Persian Gulf. You might be wondering how Iran is able to finance an arsenal of 3,000 expensive ballistic missiles, another arsenal of cruise missiles, drones, and proxies all over the place. After all, Iran is one of the world's most heavily sanctioned countries. According to a 2023 report by Castellum.ai, a data firm that monitors global supply chain issues, Iran is the second most heavily sanctioned country in the world, with 5,011 total sanctions. Nevertheless, Iran's supply of oil, which amounts to 10% of proven world reserves, and its strategic position in the Persian Gulf ensure a steady stream of revenue through export. Iran's oil exports hit a 5-year high in 2024. The trade accounts for about half of Iran's total national budget. Oil production has increased by about 30% between 2022 and 2024, going from 2.5 million barrels per day to 3.2 million. This is a level almost as high as before the Trump administration leveled its maximum pressure sanctions on Iran in 2018. Today, Iran's oil exports typically average about a third of Saudi Arabia's total volume. Iran's fiscal year begins in March. Oil exports between March 23 and 24 accounted for $35.8 billion. The exports account for all of Iran's trade surplus. Without them, Iran would have registered a $16.8 billion trade deficit, according to its customs head Mohammad Rezvanifar. In a piece of news that might not surprise you, China was the largest customer for this oil, with Beijing buying about 1.05 million barrels per day in the first 10 months of 2023. Tehran's output surged to a high of 3.17 million total barrels per day in October of that year. To evade sanctions, China designates its Iranian oil as Malaysian or as coming from another Middle Eastern country. The tankers that load the Iranian oil in the Gulf typically switch off their transponders to evade detection. Although China is by far its most important customer, Iran has also built robust oil trading relationships with American partners and treaty allies. A significant amount of Iranian oil goes to India, South Korea, Japan, and Turkey. And there's a simple reason for this: Iranian oil is cheap and of high quality. But Iran's oil trade comes with an Achilles heel. It doesn't have a lot of room to move the product. The Persian Gulf is a constrained waterway. Iran must ship most of its oil through these waters, and there is one place where 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. This is Khark Island, which is located 16 miles off the Iranian coastline and 300 miles north of the Strait of Hormuz. The only major alternate route comes by way of the Gorizh-Jask pipeline, which starts in St. Petersburg, Russia, moves south through the Caspian Sea, passes through Bandar Abbas, Iran, and ends in Mumbai, India. But this pipeline is not an ideal way for Iran to get its oil to China, nor are the various smaller venues it could use. All of these alternatives combined would only be able to handle 30% of the volume that Khark currently does, which means that if something were to happen to that facility, up to 70% of Iran's current oil product would be sitting idle. Iran would also need to build new infrastructure within its own borders, since most of its oil comes from its southwestern territory, conveniently located near Khark. If Khark goes, Iran would need to expand its existing oil facilities to handle the increased volume and reorient its internal oil trade to move product to the east, which means the loss of years and a lot of money. To make things worse for Iran, Khark Island is small, with an area of roughly 7.7 square miles. It wouldn't take a lot of power to devastate this peculiar part of Iran. Iranian air defenses would try their best to prevent an attack on the island. Khark Island's air defenses include Russia's S-300 surface-to-air missile system and other layers. These systems would likely be effective against Israeli drones, cruise missiles, and some ballistic missiles. Unfortunately for the Iranians, Israel has already demonstrated that these defenses would likely not perform gallantly against another method of attack. The Israelis put on a mock performance of what an attack on Khark could look like earlier this year. Following a ballistic missile attack on Israeli territory by Iran's Houthi proxies, the Israeli Air Force launched Operation Long Arm on July 21st. Iran's targeting Israel's F-35 fleet in October was not a coincidence, because its enemies, Adirs, played the leading part in the operation. The F-35s flew over 1,700 kilometers and struck the port of Al-Hodeida in Yemen, through which the Houthis received many of their Iranian weapons, and which has even acted as a pirate base. The targets in the attack included the port's oil refineries and fuel depots. The weapons of choice were JDAM bombs, released from a range of no greater than 19 miles. This fact demonstrated that the Israeli F-35s are easily capable of evading Iranian-made air defense systems. It was the longest-range Israeli aerial operation since the 1980s. Khark Island is closer to Israeli territory than the Al-Hodeida port that came under attack in July. Operation Long Arm was therefore a message to Iran. It demonstrated that Israel can hit Khark Island at any time and with minimal risk. Iran apparently did not heed the warning. In 1981's Operation Opera, the then hostile Jordanians tried to warn their Iraqi counterparts that Israeli fighter jets were coming. King Hussein was vacationing in the port city of Aqaba and actually saw Israeli fighters flying over his head. In what must have been déjà vu from the Six-Day War, though, the Jordanians' warnings fell on deaf ears, and the Israeli operation was a success with no casualties. The Israelis have demonstrated an even greater ability to pull this off today, thanks to their F-35 fleet. That leaves us with an obvious question. With Khark Island presenting such a high-value, easy-to-hit target, why haven't the Israelis or their allies attacked the island and shut down Iran's ability to finance its proxies? There are three reasons of varying severity. The first is for the potential disruption to the global energy market that would come just with hitting the facility. As we've noted, Iran's oil exports account for a significant portion of the world oil supply. It's the world's fourth largest exporter and is ranked 7th in the world's total oil production. The reduced supply of oil would naturally lead to higher prices, and if the Israelis destroy Khark Island, those prices will go up quickly. That might not seem like a problem for Israel or its close allies in the West, but they would pay for it indirectly. Increased energy prices in China would have ripple effects on other industries thanks to China's centrality in many of the world's most important supply chains. China remains the world's largest exporter of goods. In 2022, it totaled almost $1 trillion in electrical machinery and equipment, $552 billion worth of computers and related machinery, $150 billion worth of vehicles, $131 billion worth of furniture and other home products, and $110 billion worth of iron or steel beams that are vital for construction. These were its top 6 exports that year. If China needs to pay more for oil due to the vacuum in Iranian product, the prices of all these goods can be expected to rise, including in the United States and Israel itself. Israel imported over $14 billion worth of products from China in 2022. In this ironic way, there is a good chance that Israel would wind up harming its own economy. More importantly, Israel depends on Western aid, particularly from the United States. Its Western allies that trade even more heavily with China have helped defend Israel from Iranian missiles, as well as those of its proxies, including on October 1st. So if you're Tehran, you might be comfortable thinking that you're too big to fail and that Khark Island is safe since no one can make up for the volume. That particular part is wrong. The Saudis have even more oil than Iran. To make matters worse for the Iranians, the Saudis have been engaged in a proxy war with Iran for about as long as Israel has been, and they've demonstrated a willingness to wage this sort of energy warfare with Iran before. The Trump administration did not put its maximum pressure sanctions on Iran on a whim. Iranian oil production dropped from about 3.5 million barrels per day in 2018 to 2.1 million in 2019. This was a glut in supply that would be similar to an attack on Khark Island, but the world energy supply was fine because the Saudis stepped in to fill the gap, to the tune of over 2 million barrels per day at the time. Saudi production has since declined as Iranian production levels recovered. Although relations have improved between Iran and Saudi Arabia since the Trump administration, thanks to a deal China brokered to re-establish diplomatic relations between the two, the proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran is only at something of a pause phase. The long-running dispute between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shiite Iran means that the conflict could spark up again at any time. If things got really nasty in the region, the Saudis would ironically side with Jewish Israel and the Christian West over their supposed co-religionists in Iran. An attack on Khark Island is not something the Israelis will be able to launch unilaterally and expect to escape economic and diplomatic consequences, but with Saudi Arabia's support, it's something that can be done, if Khark Island were the only thing to consider, that is. But Iran has another card it can play. If the constrained waters of the Persian Gulf put Khark Island at risk, they also put international shipping at risk. We've seen the damage Iran's Houthi proxies have done to global maritime trade by firing on commercial ships in the Red Sea. The Persian Gulf has even more valuable trade going through its waters. The Strait of Hormuz sees the transit of 20% of the world's oil supply, along with 33 billion cubic feet of natural gas every year. These shipments do not only contain Iranian product, but that of Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region. If Iran so willed it, it could do what the Houthis have done in the Red Sea on steroids in the even more important Persian Gulf. An Iranian operation to disrupt commercial traffic in this area would result in the loss of 18 million barrels of oil per day, and this is not a total that any country will be able to make up for. There is a dress rehearsal for this too. Iran has tested the concept via its proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, and they have performed to Tehran's satisfaction. The United States and United Kingdom have led Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea against the Houthis, but nearly a year in, expert consensus is that it's proven ineffective, or not as effective as advertised. The airstrikes have not been able to significantly disrupt Houthi operations at their current intensity. Dislodging a similar Iranian blockade on the Strait of Hormuz would require significantly more resources, amid an energy crisis that would make the one in the 1970s look tame. The Iranians know this. Iranian officials have repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz to commercial shipping as part of their diplomatic threats. One of these threats came on April 9, 2024, just days before the attack on Israel. The commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Navy then said that Israel's presence in the nearby United Arab Emirates was a threat that required Iran to consider the option. Iran's calculations are simple. If we go down, we're going to take everyone else with us. Iran hasn't ever made good on these threats, but it has been arming itself with the capacity to do so. These weapons include several types of anti-ship ballistic and cruise missiles that the Houthis have already used. Iran has also built high-speed boats to attack or hijack commercial ships. Not everything needs to be so spectacular either. Iran could simply mine the strait or claim to have mined it. In May 2019, oil tankers were damaged in the Gulf by what the US government alleged were mines, although no evidence for this was presented. The following month, 2 more tankers suffered damage. It would not take too much to create a chilling effect on commercial shipping. Just as many commercial enterprises are rerouting their ships from the Red Sea and around the Cape of Good Hope, despite the higher cost in response to the Houthis, they would want to avoid possible Iranian attacks. It would take a much greater level of force than that seen in Operation Prosperity Guardian to disrupt an Iranian siege on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has the advantage in its territorial position, but there's one problem with the idea. Any operation in the Strait of Hormuz would be a war of attrition that Iran would quickly lose. Without its oil exports, Iran's economy would quickly collapse. It would collapse a lot faster than its rivals. While the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz would send the global economy into recession, Iran would not be able to keep this up for long, and the United States and its allies will lead a much larger operation than Prosperity Guardian that would eventually clear the area. The effects would be severe but temporary. In international relations, security considerations will almost always win out over economic ones. If Israel believes Iran is becoming too much of a threat, Khark Island would likely be among its first targets in a serious escalatory scenario. It would consider the closure of the Strait of Hormuz something it could overcome. But Iran has another trick up its sleeve, that arsenal of 3,000 ballistic and cruise missiles. If the regime felt it was facing destruction, which is likely the case in the event of an attack on Khark Island, it would be able to target the entire region's oil production. Iran again practiced this through its Houthi proxies in March 2022, when Aramco, one of Saudi Arabia's energy companies, saw some of its facilities hit by drones. If Iran were to launch such attacks on a broader scale, it would not only cripple world energy production, but also decrease the demand for the United States dollar, which dominates world oil transactions, and that would have a deleterious effect on the US and, by extension, the world economy, to say the least. Khark Island may be Iran's Achilles heel. There's no getting around the fact that losing it would likely see the regime in Tehran fall. However, the regime has anticipated this weakness and invested in technologies and relationships that take advantage of the global economy's Achilles heel, the reliance on oil produced in this always volatile and complicated region. The United States might not be as dependent as it once was thanks to its fracking and shale industry, but its allies and trading partners are, as is the value of its currency. Understandably, Washington has restrained Israel from acting unilaterally in this dimension, but as the danger in the Middle East grows, one wonders just how patient the Israelis will be when so tempting a target is available. How do you think the Israelis will retaliate against Iran for the October 1st attack? Will Khark Island ever come under assault by a squadron of F-35s? And would Iran go as far as is feared? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out If Israel and Iran Go to War, Who Wins? Or click this other video instead.